Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Kevin Cole on the show. He is no stranger to the show. He is the founder of the Unexpected Points newsletter and podcast, and he's given some great draft insights on this pod before. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend, even outside of football season? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. Kevin, is there a NFL draft bet that you would be willing to share with us?
There is, although I'll say this is for entertainment purposes only, and also for backing my analytical takes. You got to back your takes. You got to root for your takes. You got to back your takes, and then you got to bet on your takes. Plus EV or not. And so for me, the discussion this year, it's not running back as much as it is tight end, because all the running backs we've won. We were planting our flag. We've won. The running backs are out, but we do have Brock Bowers, who's sneaking into the consciousness here of being, a quote unquote top 5 player according to some people. I think the rationale is pretty weak for a lot of that. I wrote a pretty long article going over not only why I think that the position isn't a great option there, what people misunderstand when they're making the argument in both directions, honestly, that you should or shouldn't take him that early, and then kind of where I think that he should go. So if you look at different books...
Kevin,
yeah, go ahead.
Can you just expand on that? Because I think that's pretty interesting. So is tight end being overvalued?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it is on big boards, but a lot of things like positional value is just a problem on big boards generally, where you'll have, quarterbacks who will be in the teens or something like that on some big boards, and what their rankings will end up going number 2 or number 3 in the NFL draft. And then, vice versa for, like, let's say safety, or, like Kyle Hamilton, for example. Now, he's been a great player, so maybe he's not the best example to use here, but he was someone who was almost universally a top 5 player on big boards. But then he ended up going, I think it was 14th to the Ravens. And even the Ravens weren't exactly, I don't think they were exactly like thrilled to take him at that one. They were actually looking to trade back, but they said the phones went dead after the wide receivers were gone. So they went and made the pick there. You had the Eagles trading to get above them to take a different player, to take Jordan Davis instead of Kyle Hamilton. So there's always this disconnect there, and tight end is one of them. So the tight end valuation argument, I think there are 2 different points to it. One, again, I think is right, and by analytics people, and one of them is a little bit wrong. So there's a surplus value. So that basically says tight ends don't earn that much in the NFL. So therefore, the rookie contract break that you're getting, the cheap rookie contract, is not worth as much. And the second part is just the difficulty to evaluate these guys. The fact that the first tight end taken is rarely the best tight end. You're finding quality tight ends, whether it be Mark Andrews, Kelsey, Kittle, Goddard, others who are later on in the draft versus the top guys. So I think the first part, the surplus value, it makes some sense. But if you really, really, really hit on a high-end outcome like a Kittle or a Kelsey, they're very cheap on their second contract. So that negates it somewhere. And it's really just the second part. It's just so tough to find a truly elite tight end. And it's really only 2 or 3 guys in the NFL who are great values now, and the rest of them are like, good, solid tight ends, but I wouldn't pay too much for them.
Interesting. All right, so back to Brock Bowers. You had a take.
So back to Bowers. So I think earlier in the draft season, people were thinking that he could have been a top 10 pick. A lot of people starting to come together at around 10 for the Jets. Adam Schefter, I think not too long ago, said he'd go somewhere between 10 and 16. I don't know. I think he could fall. I think you fall a bit further. So if you look at some different odds out there, I was looking at the major ones here. For FanDuel has 11.5 is the over under, but I like even more 12.5 at DraftKings. And if you go over 12.5, it's plus 160. So that would just mean that without trades, and we could have trades in here, so who knows, but without trades, we're talking about the Jets at 10, the Vikings at 11, and the Broncos at 12. So I don't know. I just see, and I guess the Broncos is where people think his floor might be here. I mean, are the Broncos really in a position to say, you know what, we have an elite tight end and Zach Wilson, or we have elite tight end and, Cortland Sutton we're rolling out there at wide receiver and no one else. Or, as far as depth on the offensive and defensive line, I just think they got a lot of work to do at elite positions, at your tier one type of, you can only find them in the first round type of positions to throw a pick at Brock Bowers. And I also think that there's like a combination when the tipping point happens for analytics. I think it's when you have the strong backing of historical evidence plus recent like evidence that's front of mind. And I just think it's very front of mind to people because of the struggles Kyle Pitts has had the last couple of years in particular. But even going back, there's just basically been no first round tight ends over the last 10 years who have done anything, that they're going to say, you know what Brock Bowers is finally going to be the guy who falls a bit more, because Kyle Pitts, who was a airtight, can't miss prospect, has started to look like he's missing, or at least not close to the value that you would have hoped for him.
Excellent. So Brock Bowers falling, would you describe this as what you think teams should do or what you think is actually going to happen? What's the kind of mixture there?
I mean, that would be both. Like I said, I'm driven by what teams should do primarily, but I do think it falls into this idea that everyone sees what's happened over the last 10 years. In some ways, what's happened over the last 10 years with tight end is probably just we've gone through a really poor streak when it comes to first round tight ends. They're probably not like 0 for 10 is probably not going to go 0 for 10 on the next 10 first round tight ends, but that could happen there. So it's plus 160. So you're getting a little something there at DraftKings right now to go over 12.5. But like I said, I haven't done a ton of line shopping. So wherever you want to go, my bet would really be for him to potentially fall even into the 20s if you could get long odds on that, but they don't have anything that specific. Sure. Maybe if you want to bet on him going to the Bengals later, which is almost in that sort of range, or even later, that's something that I could wrap my head around.
I'm looking at an excellent tool that you produced on unexpected points last week. It is a histogram of where these players could go. I'm going to get into that a little bit more later in the show. I'm looking at it right now, and there is the narrative that the Jets are going to take him. Brock Bowers is this finished product and gives Aaron Rodgers another weapon, almost 40% to go to the Jets, according to mock draft data. And you even got Harbaugh and the Chargers at about 15%.
Yeah. I think that ship has sailed a bit. I think those are still like part of the older mocks, are still part of the calculus there. But I don't know. I mean, it's wild. You never know what can happen. But I feel like Harbaugh is just salivating over getting another offensive tackle or something like that.
Okay, fair enough. Kevin, do you have another surprising prediction for us for the 2024 NFL Draft?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the prediction, I've seen some other people mention this too, is that, one of either McCarthy, who's being talked about here, I mean, I would say, or May, but I think it's really McCarthy might fall a bit further than some people think. I'm just not sure that QB is going 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the idea, or let's say 1, 2, 3, and then 5. Seems extreme to me. I think typically one of those guys should start to fall. And I think a lot of the idea that McCarthy is going to go potentially at 4 or 5 would be based upon the interest in someone like the Vikings trading up. Right. And I guess from my perspective, if you look at when this trade happened, when the Vikings got their second first round pick. Remember, they got another first round pick, and everyone said, "Oh, this is step 1 of 2 to then get up and go get a quarterback." I don't know. I just feel like at that point in the process, McCarthy's draft position being a lot more of an unknown to me than Daniels or May. It smelled more to me like having optionality for the Vikings if that third pick became tradable to go get a May or Daniels, as opposed to McCarthy. You could kind of wait around, see what ends up happening, get closer to the draft, and then make a move at that point. So I'm just not sure the Vikings are going to be in the business of trading up for him. And if that doesn't happen, then then I don't know if he's going to be the 4th or 5th pick, as a lot of mocks are starting to come around to.
So that would suggest that that's the data coming in this week, that McCarthy's going to fall a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of data there, but I also think it's kind of my game theory type of take on what the Vikings are doing. Because again, the Vikings, people are looking to say, oh, they got that 23rd pick. They're the team, really, I think that people are seeing moving up. I mean, I guess people could say, oh, the Broncos or the Raiders could move up. Because the rest of the teams, right? Let's look at the rest of the teams here. You have the Cardinals, the Chargers, the Giants. I mean, there's some possibility the Giants would double up on quarterback there. But we will end up seeing Titans, Falcons, Bears, Jets. I mean, maybe you could have some interest from the Titans there, but then they have Will Levis. So you don't have a lot there. So you might be looking at Vikings, Broncos, or Raiders to move up. And I'm just not quite sure we'll see any of that, at least not up as far as people think it may go. And if you look at McCarthy right now, I mean, the Vikings are seen as being the most likely team to draft him. And
Right.
I think that could be the case, but I would say there's a possibility they could wait. They could wait and
Right.
see and not use that second pick to move up to get him. Whereas other people are really thinking that someone's going to move up and get him.
They could wait until 11, right? I mean, they could just sit
Yes.
still thinking that the New York Giants still believe Daniel Jones is their answer. Tennessee's got Will Levis, and I got my question marks there. Kirk Cousins is in Atlanta. The Bears just drafted Caleb Williams. Aaron Rodgers is with the Jets, right? So is that part of the
Yeah,
thinking?
yeah. I mean, the over-under right now, at least at DraftKings, again, I haven't done a lot of price shopping here, is 5.5 on McCarthy, and the over is even money. So it's a little bit weighted towards going in the top 5, and I don't know. I guess at even money, I would say somebody's probably going to slip out of the top 5. It's probably going to be McCarthy. The Vikings, I don't think are going to want to necessarily to move up, because I mean they don't have a great roster like around the quarterback. Also,
Yeah.
as far as using more picks to move up, maybe they would say, okay, for Drake May, yes, but for McCarthy, no. So they have that ammunition possibly. Let's say if May it becomes available and the Patriots are looking to move the number 3 pick, but I don't know. I just don't know if they're going to go up to 4 or 5 and have to pay a hefty sum to really get up to that level for McCarthy.
Then what do you think Arizona does at number 4 then if they keep that?
Well, there's so much chatter about what they would do or trading out or not. Um, if they keep it, I think they would go Harrison. But their calculation, this will be an interesting one. Like maybe we have a Sammy Watkins sort of situation in the top here where there are certain big board rankings. I mean, Harrison's the number 1 consensus big board prospect. Some rankings have him as being nearly equivalent to someone like Neighbors, but some have a vast difference between the two. So I don't know if you're the Cardinals and you're sitting there, if you're one of the teams that says we have them as a 1A, 1B type of situation versus a 1, a big tier, and then a 2 situation, maybe you try and find a team that says, you know what, we are a 1 and then a big drop and then a tier type of situation. And maybe we move down a little bit. I don't know. Could the New York Giants be willing to trade a little bit to get up 2 spots to go do that? Could the Tennessee Titans be willing to do that because they don't want to have Neighbors instead? Could the Chicago Bears, you got a lot of like house money effect going on with them, right? They got a lot of picks. They have a pretty good team. Could the Bears say, you know what, we want to go up from 9 to 4 and then take Harrison there rather than wait around for the wide receiver 3, whereas the Cardinals are like, you know what, we'll take the wide receiver 3 in this class. So if they stay, I think it would be Harrison. If they move, I think it's because they're not as high on Harrison vis-a-vis the other wide receivers, and they're willing to let someone else pay up for it.
Fascinating. Kevin, you posted some really interesting histograms about where particular players might go in this draft. Tell us about how that came about, the data that you're using, and what we can get out of that.
Sure. So the data comes from Benjamin Robinson, who runs a site, but it's really more of a data collection analysis service called Grinding the Mocks, where he's collecting I think it's into the thousands of mock drafts from different analysts, media, and others. And then he has weightings based upon historical accuracy of those drafts. And he weights each of them also according to timing. So like he was telling me on a recent podcast where I interviewed him, that the mock drafts that are coming in this week take, a quarter to a half of all of the weighting for what he comes up with for his overall numbers for the mock draft. So very, very, very important, but we don't discount what was happening earlier in these. So that's where all the data comes from. And I, aggregate all this, and I try to show some a bar plot here of where the different players could go as far as their weighted mock percentages for different teams. And I think it gives a better idea of, range of outcomes for them, who people are expecting to go to. And then you can see for certain players, like again, like a Marvin Harrison versus Malik Neighbors, there's at least some idea that Neighbors could fall quite a bit further, or it could be an object of people trading up from the middle of the draft to go get him. Whereas for someone like Harrison, it's one of the top 6 teams is really gonna take him. One of the top 6 picks is almost a certainty there versus others. So I think it helps also get us a range of outcomes type of thing, because those two, their rankings are 4 and 5 overall, but you can notice a pretty distinct difference when you're looking at the range of outcomes.
What I really like is that you're doing this weighting both by accuracy and then when the mock draft comes out, because obviously mock drafts closer to the actual event are much more accurate. I think that's pretty much the same with political polling as well. Is that reflected in Benjamin's data over grinding the mocks, or is he doing more of a average to show his expected draft position?
No, that's reflected in his data over there. So he has I think he calls it an EDP,
right? Expected draft position.
Yeah, so it falls into that. And I know that the data that he's presenting to the public, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but I think it's a subset of what he's also working with different, NFL teams when it comes to their building out expectations for when players will go, which is becoming a something that's better. I mean, I'll plug another thing that I haven't worked with, but ESPN has on their analytics website, they now have probabilities that players will go at certain draft positions and the probability they'll be left. So that's all there too. Now, the one thing that I'll caution on for the data that I'm presenting here, and then I think it's also present in ESPN's data too, is there's probably there's a degree of overconfidence, right, in these different mock drafts, or a degree of the inability for individual mock drafters to really present accurately a likelihood of a bunch of different scenarios that no one had any clue were possible going into the draft. And we see every single year with teams trading, teams passing on positions we thought that they needed, teams taking players we thought were, third round prospects, all that sort of thing ends up happening. So a lot of chaos gets thrown into it. So I would say, look at the data, look at the numbers, and then add a healthy dose of just general chaos once you get outside of the top 5 picks.
It's definitely an important caveat to know that this data is not perfect. You do a really good job in your article last week of talking about where this could go wrong, at least for the top 10 picks. I think this is incredibly useful from a betting perspective. I tend to stay away from like the top 10 picks because that tends to be where rumor and information is going to tend to swing the market. I think the back half of the first round is where you're going to potentially find value with this wisdom of crowds type approach. One thing I put in my newsletter this past Saturday is a cornerback like Terrion Arnold. His expected draft position was 15.8, if I'm not mistaken, and his market was 15.5. And what your histogram shows is like, well, there's a lot of weight of that towards the under. There's a lot of teams like the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, and particularly the Colts that are in the market for a cornerback. And, I kind of wish that you would sum it up for me, but I could estimate from the histogram, what's the likelihood that he goes under 15.5. And I don't know, I forget what I wrote. It's probably 60%-ish. And that looks like something that is on the cusp of happening. The mock draft data that's coming in this week, Monday, Tuesday, seems to think that Terrion Arnold is moving up as the second cornerback. So that's really why I found it useful. Like, it's just that second half of the first round, right? Like I want to be a little bit more quantitative with things, although I certainly haven't been recently on my site, but I try to be. And I think that's like where you can potentially find value, like bets on stuff like how many running backs go, or how many position players at a certain position group go in the first round, stuff like that. I think that's kind of where the data can be super useful. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, this is more of a intuition game theory sort of take than a database take. But when you mentioned with Arnold in particular, how you have the Vikings, the Broncos, and the Raiders with decent percentages there, almost being like the fallback sort of selection if they don't take a quarterback. We'll see with the mocks this week, but I just got the sense that too many mocks in recent weeks have been throwing Bo Nix into one of those teams right there, and this is where I'm kind of separating my analytical brain versus what I think is going to happen brain. I wouldn't be against taking a quarterback there. Like, I think quarterbacks are not overdrafted. They're the value there is so huge. But like, why wouldn't Will Levis have gone to somebody last year instead of falling all the way to the second round if that's the case? I just feel like when you start to get into these iffier quarterbacks, teams are too tempted to say I can get an elite player at another position. So if those teams don't trade up into the top 5 to get a top 3 quarterback, maybe McCarthy goes in that sort of range, but then we have 2 out of those 3 teams that are firing at other positions, and we're not exactly expecting that because we've seen Bo Nix go to one of 2 of them in so many different mock drafts, and then Nix in reality ends up falling out of the first round or something of that nature.
I did want to ask you about this notion that teams do tend to trade up to get a quarterback. Obviously, this isn't always the case, or Will Levis would have never fallen out of the first round last year. So it's always a combination of this tendency for teams to trade up and get their guy, but also the evaluation, right? So when you say JJ McCarthy is going to drop, that probably also reflects the Vikings' evaluation, right?
Yeah, I think that affects the valuation. It's just like he was one of the more questionable guys, at least coming into the process. And who knows? I mean, he could have moved up so much, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I also think if you're interested in over unders that are near the tipping point of the end of the first round, um, teams have cooled significantly, and I think rightfully, on, hey, we need to trade up into the first round, or we need to draft this player in the first round in order to get the 5th-year option on the player, because of the fact that the options are pretty expensive now. I mean, if you have a quarterback, if you make multiple Pro Bowls as a rookie, which is pretty tough to do. But like, if you make multiple Pro Bowls as a rookie, your 5th-year option is $38 million this coming season. It's $35 million if you've made 1 Pro Bowl. So like, if you hit on a quarterback, you're getting a $35 million a year instead of a $45-50 million a year. Like, yeah, that's great, but like, you have to guarantee these things a year in advance. And we've seen with Zach Wilson, we've seen with Sam Darnold, we've seen with Baker Mayfield, we've seen with all these guys that they just didn't end up needing these 5th-year options. They're probably mistakes in retrospect for those that were picked up. So I think teams have cooled on those a lot. I mean, even for wide receiver, if you're a multiple Pro Bowl wide receiver, so Jamar Chase, his 5th-year option, if he being exercised, is a $22 million option. I mean, that's a few million less than like Devontae Smith's recent contract, but it's not a huge savings for having to guarantee it a full year out in advance. So I would fade like teams thinking they need to trade into the first round to get a quarterback or something like that. They can go ahead and sit and take one like the Tennessee Titans did for Will Levis last year.
Excellent. I wanted to get your take a little bit more on the overall quarterback situation. It looks almost certain that Caleb Williams is going number 1 to Chicago. There was some question, I think, last week about who the number 2 pick would be, but it looks like Jaden Daniels is pretty much a definitive favorite, which puts Drake May into the number 3 overall spot. Do you expect that that's how that's going to go, or could we see something crazy with the quarterback situation at the top?
I don't think we're going to see anything crazy, meaning I think it's not going to be McCarthy sneaks into the top 3 situation, as we've discussed,
Right.
previously. Could we see Drake May at number 2? Yeah, I think we could. I think we could see that. I mean, I think the data when it comes to not only the mock draft data, but the big board data, really shows a clear Caleb Williams and then everybody else. Like the distance between Caleb Williams and May and Daniels is enormous compared to the
Right.
distances that teams have between May and Daniels. So I think that's while they may be ranked 1, 2, 3, just you looking at a non-range of outcomes and a non-specific rankings for them, where you're really getting insight on them, you could say, oh, well, they're all kind of bunched up there. The reality seems to be Williams, even in evaluation. And of course, everyone knows 100% basically that he's going to the Bears at this point. Where the other two are very close. So could the Commanders still be ambivalent about who they're going to draft here? Who knows? I mean, we do have a 49ers GM now, and they pulled a switcheroo, it seems like, the weekend before the NFL draft a few years ago to take Trey Lance. So we'll see.
Yeah, that didn't quite work out, although the quarterback situation in San Francisco seems pretty good right now. You also mentioned Jim Harbaugh, the Chargers at the 5th pick. He might be interested in getting an offensive tackle. The markets seem to think that he's going to draft a wide receiver with Neighbors and Harrison as the two most likely there. It kind of seems obvious that they should want a wide receiver, given that they lost their 2 veterans this year, but what do you think happens there?
Well, yeah, I agree that if you're talking about like position of need, it's more so the wide receiver, not only because they don't have a wide receiver there, but I
They probably
mean,
still have Quentin Johnson on the team, right?
okay, sorry, let me caveat. They don't have a wide receiver who's good at catching footballs down the field, so that's problematic in today's NFL. And the other factor is, I mean, I do think they could be interested in an offensive line, but the other factor is that Rashawn Slater is a left tackle. He's been a good left tackle. There's been some injury stuff there, but he's been a good left tackle. So if you do draft, let's say Joe Alt there, who I think also like his max value case is for him being a left tackle. And I know the NFL has gone a little bit like right tackle, left tackle. They're both equally important. Everyone loves Mitchell Schwartz and Lane Johnson got a huge contract and all that sort of stuff. I still think that makes a left tackle a little bit less valuable for them. So I agree, but I guess I just wouldn't rule out for them going for another tackle there, being that Harbaugh seems to really like the running game.
So Joe Alt plus 500 on FanDuel. No, that's the 6th pick. Sorry, plus 400.
The analytical case for Alt is that if you look at, I have these draft curves, these valuation curves, which combine a couple different things. It's like the surplus value you can get for position. So tackle, edge, and like a dominant pass rushing interior defender player, like an Aaron Donald type of player, or someone who can really rush the passer. Those in a way are a little bit more valuable than wide receiver, and the availability of those positions outside of the top half of the first round, or even the first round period, it's just really, really hard to find a great offensive tackle, edge rusher, or interior pass rusher. Whereas for wide receiver, lots of great wide receivers we found in the 2nd round, some in the 3rd round. So for that reason, also the analytical case might be, when in doubt between the two positions, go with the tackle, because you're going to have a harder time filling that another way than you might be able to fill wide receiver, not at the level of a Malik Neighbors, but you might be able to fill wide receiver further down the line with a very capable player if you throw enough darts at the position.
Kevin Cole, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show this week. Please let everyone know where they can get all your good work.
Yeah, unexpectedpoints.substack.com. There's a podcast, there's a YouTube channel. If you go Unexpected Points, you'll find all of the stuff there. This week, I'm going to publish, hopefully in the next few hours, what I call my analytical big board, where I combine big board grading from Sports Info Solutions with my own ideas on surplus value of different positions. So then it translates those rankings into a solid, like, how would you actually draft these players using those types of grades. So that'll come out today. Hopefully I'll have one more consensus mock once we're able to,
That
when
would
I
be
say
awesome.
I mean, when
So
I
with
say
the
we're, I
histogram?
mean, Yeah, yeah. So which will mean once Benjamin Robinson has been able to grind through all the mocks that came out yesterday. So hopefully that tomorrow. And I think Benjamin Robinson is also going to publish something where it's like his own mock draft for the first round on the site that we'll publish tomorrow.
Okay, that's not as useful as your histograms. Just remember that.
Okay.
If you want to put
hopefully we have both. Hopefully we have both.
If you want to put 60% that someone goes under the 15.5 for a pick, that would be useful. I can figure it out myself, Kevin. But
yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too precise. I think you can
no,
have
I know, and you don't want
the illusion of precision is a problem here. So I like to say it's all the wrong, but they're all models are wrong but useful. So I kind of say you don't want to get too definitive because then you become more wrong and maybe less useful. So mine's more okay, you look at the numbers and hopefully it's useful.
Yeah, I certainly think it's useful. I think you don't want to. I think from your perspective, you don't want to be like, hey, go bet this because of this data, right? And I certainly wouldn't recommend that either. I would want to look for other pieces of evidence that this is a good bet. But anyways, I appreciate your work. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me this week.
All right, thanks for having me, Ed.
You have been listening to the Football Analytics Show podcast. My name is Ed Fang, your host. A quick reminder, you can get my free sports betting newsletter. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. We will continue to have episodes during the off season, so I will talk to you probably next week. Thanks again for listening.